I think matter itself imposes form on form. Now, I think there was a generation of people who thought you could just deal with the theory of ideas and that matter was irrelevant. But if you make the same form in glass, or you make the same form in concrete, or you make the same form in plastic, you're going to have a very different relationship to your bodily movement and how you know the space. These pieces are bent under a tremendous amount of compression, so you feel the coiling of the steel as you pass through. But if you have 550 tons in here, the amazing thing about the work is that it seems light. It seems like it moves as you move. You don't sense the weight. And that wouldn't happen in any other material. And I think that really did get lost, but it didn't get lost with some earlier architects. If you take Louis Kahn, he said, I look at a brick and I ask it what it wants to be. And I had happened to study at Yale, and Albers had been there.
He looks at a brick and says, what does this brick want to be?
Yes. Which means that the brick has an internal logic in terms of its own building, in terms of its size, its thickness, and proportion.
It has form, shape, and place.
Yes, yes. So if I'm dealing with matter, and I think it's true of any matter, the matter itself imposes its own form on form. And I think I can't emphasize that enough. It's not that I'm in love with steel, but I want to use steel to shape space. Space is really the subject matter in relation to your body movement. How do you do that?
So we'll just stop there. What this is all about, where you, called by Time magazine one of the great American living artists, you are about the relationship between human and space. That's the defining idea of what Richard Serra is about.
Movement through space.
Movement through space.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah, how the body knows space, how the body registers space through movement in time.
And when did you come to that? Because Splash was not about that.
I think
putting things on the wall was not about that.
Yeah, I think I know.
When?
I was building a piece for Jasper Johns, and I was very, very involved with process. And
always have been.
Yeah, and Johns, he saw a splash piece of lead at the Whitney Museum where I was splashing molten lead against the wall and the floor and casting it. He said, would you build one for me? And I said, sure, Jasper. And so Phil Glass and I went over to spend couple of days with them. Cage was there, and it was immersed, and it was nice. We had lunch together, whatever.
Cunningham, John Cage.
Yeah.
Jasper Johns.
Yeah.
And Richard Serra.
And Phil Glass.
Just stopping by for lunch.
Just stopping by to make
you have space for five.
Yes. For a cup of tea.
A cup of tea. Yes.
Just to make a work with a lot of hot molten lead.
Yes.
And while I was doing this, we were setting up. And I had a lead plate that I was going to melt down. And the plate was maybe 2 or 3 feet high and about 6 or 7 feet long. And I took it and I placed it in the corner. I just wanted to get it out of the way. Right. And it happened to bisect the corner. Now, if you think about a vertical edge bisecting the corner of a room, what happened was when I put the plate in the corner, it couldn't fall over. It couldn't fall to the one side of the corner, couldn't fall to the other side of the corner. It couldn't fall to either wall, which meant it was freestanding. I thought, well, I came here to do process in relation to one thing, but what if I have in front of me is another idea? And that idea led me to take a plate, a single plate, maybe 10 or 12 feet high, 24 feet long, and just put it in the corner of a room. If you put it in the corner of a room, it freestands. All of a sudden, what it did was it divided and declared the room not only as an installation, but as a whole volume. And that pretty much took me from the process pieces that were on the wall and the floor into a space that you had to walk into, through, and around. Immediately following that, someone offered me a show in Documenta, and they said, listen, Richard, we can give you a 36-foot square room. What do you want to do? I said, 4 plates out of 4 corners. Now, there's a smaller version of that called Circuit upstairs where the plates are 10 by 20. But that really opened it up. That took me out of the studio and into the necessity to deal with rigging and to deal with context, not studio context, but any context that was proposed to me, either institutional or urban or landscape.
Do you believe, though, that the defining works of Richard Serra are what we're looking at here and those things that beget these? That's the defining work for you and how you are perceived today, because time goes on, as a artist.
See, I see it as one continuum. I don't see it as
Slicing it up and putting
no,
it.
like, does this work define you? Did the early
You wouldn't have
prop piece-
gotten here if you hadn't been there.
No, I mean, I don't think that art, at least not my art, proceeds that way. It proceeds kind of not linear. It proceeds in fits and starts. Like, you do a group of work and then you backtrack and then you do another group of work, and then it's not like you sit down and you write your own history. It's not, I don't think for most artists it is that way. You can't anticipate your next move. You just continue to work. And if the path branches out, so be it. But you don't understand your relationship to the past until you go back and analyze it. And most artists don't look over their shoulder in that way. It's like being an analysis. You don't understand your third reading until you've had your 80th, and then you go, oh, I understand that. There's a pattern there, right?
Yeah.
But that's not what artists do. Artists, I don't think, say, oh, I'm going to build on this work and squeeze the lemon again and again. I think what they do is try to reinvent continuously. And I think what the next generation will do, because you don't know what unexpected youth is ever going to do, is find another way to proceed. And that's what makes art vital and which makes it not academic. If they just did what the forefathers did, they would be march stepping in tune with the academia. But because they challenge the generations that have become before and before, art remains vital. And that's why you can't predict it. You can't
Tell me
foresee it.
one piece of art that catapulted you forward as an artist. Just take one.
Probably Las Meninas.
You went to Spain and you saw it there.
Yeah, and I was a painter at the time. And I was looking at the Velázquez, and in the painting, basically there's a big room kind of punched out. And it seems as if there's a film in front of the room, and then there's a projected space into the exterior where you're standing. So the painting, not only look into the painting in the perspective of the painting and back to the door with the other artist standing looking into the room, and Velázquez looking at the painting, and the La Infanta looking at you, and the royal family looking at you, but Velázquez is directly looking at you while you're standing. So in a sense, that object-subject shift that I was talking about occurs. You become the subject of looking at the painting. It's not just looking into the painting, but it's the people in the painting looking at you.
Exactly.
When I looked at that painting, I thought, I'm not going to be able to do that. First of all, I don't have the facility of Velázquez, between my hand and my shoulder. But secondly, I don't know if I can change that subject-object relationship. Not in painting, not on a flat surface. And I decided, all right, paintings go in the Arno. I'm going to try to figure out how to put the subject on the viewer, not within the frame of the work.
Now, your mother early on spotted your drawing ability. So at that time, you were pushing towards becoming a painter.
Yes.
And you came out of that experience at some point
Yes,
soon.
drawing is something I've always done.
Saying, but you don't draw before you start a piece of work.
Unless you think making models is drawing, unless you think while you're forming a model that you're looking at the volume, that you're looking at the edge, that you're looking at the elevation, and that's a form of drawing. Depends on what you think drawing is. If you think drawing is just an inscription on a flat piece of paper, or on the wall, or on a canvas, that's one way. But you can see everything as drawing. You can think of the edges of these pieces as drawing. You can think of the way that the volumes are formed of drawing. You can think of the circulation of drawing. You can think of the way they lean as drawing. You can think of the way that they fill the space as drawing. I mean, if I look at what I think are great sculptors, what they have is the ability to draw in multifaceted ways. If I look at someone like Donatello, he can go from an arm that's sinuous and turning to a volume like the Guatemala that's weightless of a big equestrian rider. So when I look at sculpture, sculptors in the past, I look to how they've been able to turn a form in relation to drawing. I'll give you an example. Matisse's serpentine figure. You can walk around that figure forever and not completely understand it in the round, and it's only about this high. But it always evades your ability to reduce it to a gestalt, to reduce it to one reading, because it continually turns in its volume. If I look at Picasso's Absinthe Glass, the same thing. If I look at Picasso's early guitar, the fact that the guitar opens a space, even though it's on the wall, and says, you can enter into this space if this were larger. Somehow, he's fractured the notion of modeling and casting. So once the guitar was built, and the Russians then picked up on it, and then later the 60s generation in the United States, it pretty much made modeling and casting a convention. Now, that doesn't mean modeling and casting are not going to continue, and it doesn't mean that work's ever going to come off the pedestal, because there's people still modeling and casting things and putting them on a pedestal. But from my position, that seems to be a heavily trotted convention that's really not extending the evolution of sculpture.
Well, you in fact believe that when sculpture came off the pedestal, it was one of the defining moments.
I think it was
in the evolution of sculpture.
I think it was a defining moment. I think it was, yeah. And I think Picasso had something to do with it. I think the Russians had something to do with it. I think Giacometti very early on, by doing Woman with Her Throat Cut on the floor, anticipated it. I think Andre and Judd in the minimalist movement kind of reinforced it. I think myself and Smithson and Bruce Nauman extended it, and Richard Long in England. But I think recently that notion has been kind of put to the side, because there's a lot of work, because of the market, that's easy or to accrue value, because you can put it here or send it there or whatever, and if you put it on the pedestal, it's homeless in a way that makes everybody have the possibility of owning it. So the marketplace actually mitigates against the idea that work has a permanent site and you can walk into and through and around it.
Yeah, but it does. I mean, because you build things for specific sites.
Yeah, try to tell that to a dealer who wants to sell them.
Do you have in mind interior or exterior when you sculpt?
Depends. If I'm giving a site, usually I work in condition to context, right. So the context really defines what I want to do. So not really, no. But
because this could be here, it could be, this could be here, it could be at Bilbao, it could be.
But it was these pieces.
In a huge space outside.
No, I don't think so. I think these pieces. I think these pieces really need the definition of architecture. They need a flat floor. They need a certain contained volume. I think these pieces might be able to be in a courtyard, but if you put these pieces outside, say in the big field, they're going to get lost. They're going to be.
They'll be overwhelmed. You need the confinement of space to feel the human experience.
For these particular pieces, in order to sense their exterior and their interior volume, you need a certain kind of containing space. I think these pieces in particular are not going to work in the landscape.
So how are these pieces different from the pieces that are at Bilbao?
Well, they differ in the invention formally, but in terms of being interior to spaces, those pieces were built for interior spaces, and so were these. But these, I think, are more complex. That's not saying qualitatively they're better, but they're much more complex.
And complex in what way?
Complex in physically understanding them. I mean, these pieces demand a certain concentration in terms of understanding how they unfold in space.
Okay, you mean in terms of the concentration of the artist or the concentration of the person who is experiencing the art?
I think the viewer needs to pay attention to their continuous movement through them, because they demand more in terms of the time to understand them as you walk them.
Is the experience of enjoying this exponentially bigger inside than outside?
That's contrary to fact conditional. I can't tell you.
Contrary to fact conditional. I mean, you've been seeing too many psychiatrists.
No. Well, I did that for 8 years, but nevertheless, you're asking me a question about if it could be somewhere else, right? Yes. I don't know about if it could be somewhere else. You have to deal with where it is now. I mean, someone walked in one of my pieces and they said, "Oh, I'd like to see the sky above." Well, fine, but that's not where we are.
Exactly.